grief. I want to talk about grief because that's an experience that we all unfortunately have to experience. It's part of the human condition. It's part of just the human process, and it really humanizes us, doesn't it? But I wanted to talk about things for just considerations that people who are grieving can take, as well as considerations for those of you who are, who love someone who's grieving, things that you can do to help them cope with the grieving process. So I want to start out with three things you should never say to a grieving person. One thing is, never tell a grieving person to be strong. That is quite insulting, and we understand the reasoning for doing that, because when you love someone and you're seeing them grieve, it hurts. It hurts to watch someone we care about grieve. So we want to fix it. We want to comfort it. We want to make it better for them. But understand, grief is not meant to be fixed. It's meant to be felt. So that's the first thought that you're going to have to accept. Not meant to be fixed, but meant to be felt. So never tell a grieving person to be strong. I've been in situations where I've watched people who are losing their parents or people who are losing their child be told by family members to be strong. And there's nothing as crushing as you can say to a person, because they are pretty much just dying inside themselves. So to imply that that's erroneous, that they shouldn't be feeling those feelings, is so unfair to a person who's experiencing such a traumatic time in life. And I see Kaylin, you agree with this. Never attempt to make a grieving person feel better by telling them at least the person's out of their suffering, or a person who may have been a caregiver for someone by telling them, well, at least that burden of caregiving is lifted. I can remember when my father passed, and people were, coming in from all over the country to the funeral. And my mom had taken care of my dad for nearly 20 years after he suffered a massive stroke, and he was, incapable of taking care of himself. And several people shared this sentiment with her. Well, at least that burden of caring for him is over. And she didn't take that kindly at all, which she should not have. And she let everyone know. She got up at the funeral in front of the church and she told everyone, she said, he was not my burden. He was my best friend. So understand, we all know that your intentions of saying things like that is to be comforting. It's to help the person in your mind that you care about feel better. But this is not a time for the person feeling better. This is a time for you to just be there. And I'm going to talk about things you can do to help a person who's grieving and not make them feel worse by saying statements that, are well intended, but actually make things worse. And never tell a person they should be over the grieving by now. Grief belongs to the griever, and it's subjective. So everybody's different and every experience can be different. So it's very important for you guys to understand that there are no time limits on it. All these statements, like I said, I know they're well-intentioned and you understand the grieving person that is hurting and you want to fix it. But if anything, any statement you take out of this broadcast today is that grief is meant to be felt and not fixed. So what are some things that you can do for a person who's grieving? What are some things as a friend that you can do as someone who loves this person? You don't want to see them hurt. You just be there. Just listen. I can remember after my mom dying, a friend coming over to my house, and she just sat down next to me on the sofa and she just put her hand over my hand. And that was it. That was it. And for me, that was enough because I had no energy to talk. I had nothing to give. And I just wanted someone to just be there. Offer love. Offer love. Bring a dish, as we all do. But understand, when you go to a person who's grieving, especially in the midst of grieving, and you go to their house, as we all do, especially in our culture, you bring a dish and you do all that stuff. Understand that person is not your host when you're there. I had someone tell me once that they had someone show up at their house during their time of grieving and looked at the food and asked if they're, told them they had some dietary restrictions and wanted to know if there were any foods there that would meet their dietary restriction. That person should have brought their own food, okay? Own food. So they're not your host when you're there. You're there to just give love, So those are things that you just don't want to say to a person who's going through one of the most difficult times. Grief is, I tell people, it's visceral. It just really gets to the core of your humanity, and it really tears you down. And for those of you who are grieving, I want you to understand, we're all familiar with the emotional effects of grieving, the crying, sadness, all types of emotions. We're familiar with just even the social effects where feeling you want to isolate. But I want you guys to understand the physical ramifications of grief also. And many people who are grieving, it's manifested physically. It can be loss of appetite, difficulty sleeping, weakness, fatigue, even heaviness and pains. The day after my mom's funeral, I woke up with such a pain and heaviness in my legs. Only time I'd ever felt that pain before was when I had a session with a sadistic trainer and couldn't walk for like a week afterwards. And I didn't understand where this pain had come from because I was just at the funeral, the day before. I hadn't did anything strenuous. And the next day in a conversation with my sisters, they both expressed the same thing. I didn't even share with them beforehand that that's what I felt. But we found out we all woke up with this heaviness and this unbelievable pain in our legs that was unexplained. But those are the physical manifestations of grief that can occur. I mean, research has even shown that grieving elderly people, this research was done on elderly people, are more susceptible to infectious diseases and a weakened immune system. So those of you who love someone who's grieving, do whatever you can to make sure that they're attending to themselves physically. That could be just going out, taking them for a walk, or bringing them a meal to make sure they're eating, whatever it may be, making sure they're taking whatever medications they need to take, and so on. So what about those of you who are grieving? What do you do? So 5 things I want the grieving person to consider is, first of all, there's no timeline, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Let go of time expectations. Allow the emotions to come. C.S. Lewis said grieving is like a long valley, a long winding valley where any bend in that valley may reveal a totally new landscape. And this is so true. And in conversations I've had recently with clients of mine who are experiencing grief, they're talking about how, it could be a certain smell or, just anything. It can be a song. I know for myself, I couldn't listen to that song. That Tamala Mann song, that Take Me to the King, that was so popular and played on every single station all the time. It was sang at my mom's funeral. And I tell you, after that funeral, every time that song came on the radio, I had to change the station because I couldn't do it. I could not. I knew I would just turn into just mush. And my kids even knew because they would start to tense up when the song came on the radio and we'd have to turn that station real quick. And I realized, probably about a year later when that song came on and I didn't feel the urge to change the station, I even sang along. I knew that I was in the process. I knew that I had made some progress in my grief, but grief never goes away. But so many different landscapes and considerations that may come up that you never even realize. I remember thinking to myself, and I hadn't never imagined this would be a thought that crossed my mind. But in the time of grieving and that week or so planning for the funeral, I looked at one of my children and I said, oh my God, one day they're going to feel this pain that I'm feeling right now. And that made me even more grief stricken because I didn't want my kids to ever feel the pain I was feeling over losing a mother. So you never know what may be lurking around that corner and landscape, but just be gentle. Just be gentle with yourself. That's what's necessary during that. So some other considerations for those of you who are grieving is that you want to make sure if there's ever a time you want to talk to somebody, be it a counselor, be it a group or what have you, there are lots of grief counseling groups, do it. And people say, well, when do you do it? Do you do it a year after the grief or what? You do it whenever you feel like it will be beneficial for you to talk to someone. I personally, to help me process it, I found a counselor who was really good, and I went and I had several sessions with that person to just help me process this. Because after after losing someone, it's like, it's inexplainable because you just never know what emotions may come up. I, for a time, felt like, what's the point? Every goal I had, every desire that I may have had for myself to achieve, it was like I just felt no purpose to do anything. No speaking, no writing, no talking, or what have you. And it's so, in my foolishness, I really believed, or wanted to believe, that after the funeral, that things would go back to normal and I'd be okay, and that was foolishness, because that's when the pain really starts. People have oftentimes said grief happens in what they call stages or cycles. And in a conversation I recently had, again, with someone who was grieving, I found in my own experience, it comes more as waves. It's like, imagine yourself being at a beach, and the water is real calm. Then all of a sudden, waves come, and they continue to come, and they get higher and higher, and they're knocking you off your feet. And that's what grieving feels like. It's knocking the wind off of you. Every time you try to get up, there's another wave coming. And that's what grief feels like. You find yourself okay. You're okay one moment. You may be laughing about something that the deceased person had done. And then all of a sudden you're crying because here comes another wave. And that's part of just the grieving process. Those waves are always going to come for the rest of your life when you lose someone you're close with. But the good news is the waves become less forceful. They become further apart, in their delivery, not as crushing, and not as overwhelming and consuming as they once were. And you begin to function. You begin to function in this new normal that is your life, because that's what we ultimately have to understand, is that this is the new normal. Learning to live life without this person, learning to live life without this person. And that's not easy. And there are no timelines to that, but it's possible, guys. It's possible. So just considerations for those of you who love someone that's grieving: never tell a person to be strong. No timelines, just be very respectful of that person's process. Grief is not meant to be fixed. It's meant to be felt. Hopefully these things help you guys. Share it on your timeline. Share it with someone who may be grieving, or may be supporting someone who's grieving. And please share with me your own personal experiences. Go to, send me an email. This is what brought up this topic, an email from one of the In Full Bloom with Dr. Rose group members who just experienced multiple losses, wanted to just have me touch on this topic. But I'd like to know what your own personal experiences are. Comment on this video or send me a message if you prefer. I appreciate you guys coming out. This is something we don't like to talk about, not one of those fun topics, but it's necessary because we're all going to experience this part of life, and we can be there for each other to just make it a little bit more palatable for us all. So guys, have a great day. Get out there, live your life in full bloom, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.